This past weekend, I got to go to both Kings Island and Cedar Point, each for the third time, and had a great time rewriting some of my favorite coasters and trying out each park's new additions. In this video, I'll share my thoughts on them as well as give a more overall review of my experience at these two parks. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start off, let's discuss some of the winners and losers among coasters I got re-rides on. We'll go through some of the winners, losers, and coasters on which my perspective didn't really change. The first winners of this trip for me was both of the Giga coasters, Orion and Millennium Force. I got pretty good rides on both of them and gained a larger appreciation for them as a whole, despite them being on the lower tier of Giga coasters I've ridden. Both of them jumped up about 10 spots or so from my last rankings before the trip as a result. Orion has a great first half with that drop and the first two large turns followed by the speed hill. Unfortunately, the trim brakes on the Camelback do still tend to kill the rest of the ride, so I do have to nitpick that unfortunately. And just experiencing the pure speed offered by Millennium Force is a huge rush despite the lack of airtime and other forces. Although even saying that, I did gray out on the bottom of the first hill, much to my surprise. The view from Lake Erie on the lift hill is also spectacular as always, and this coaster just hits. I definitely got a better ride on Banshee this time around, and it has secured a spot in my overall top 50. The first drop is particularly fun, and the ride just feels super fast in general. It was running glass smooth, and all the elements were great while I was there. It still doesn't have the same level of intensity as some other inverts like Raptor and Montu in my opinion, but Banshee does what it does very well. My least favorite part about it is the restraints. The B&M vest restraints are just very uncomfortable for me, and I much prefer the traditional over-the-shoulder restraints. Overall, I've gained a new appreciation for this coaster and can see why people love it now. This is pretty much a winner because I finally got to get that fabled night ride, and let me tell you, it lived up to every bit of the hype I had for it. It was truly an out-of-this-world experience. Outside of that though, the ride in general was running great and managed to jump up a few spots in my overall rankings even. It just was such a long ride with a super fun layout in the woods, and even though it isn't the most intense. Well, until you come off that second lift into the Helix. It is simply just one of the greatest ways to end a coaster, and it somehow felt like I was going through it even faster during my night ride. I didn't go into this coaster expecting much more than I got last time, but I shocked myself with how much fun I had on it. Despite it being the 6th best coaster in the park still, it is a fairly intense ride that is way smoother than I anticipated. The swinging of the cars was also very fluid, and everything just came together for a great unexpected ride experience. I also love the setting being in the trees and kind of off the normal path of the park. I finally got my ride in the Magic Cedar and I just wasn't all that impressed with it. It felt a bit rougher and just overall not as fun as my rides back in 2021. I ended up having to drop it pretty significantly in my overall rankings. The ride is still fast and the airtime was nice, but I did feel like I had to play defense a bit during the ride, which made it less enjoyable to me. It is still definitely a top 50 coaster though, and hopefully I'll get a better ride next time I get to Cedar Point. I am a bit hesitant to call this one a loser because I only got to ride it in the morning when it was very warm. The first drop was great as always, but the airtime just didn't hit as much. I did end up dropping it slightly, but I'm not going to be too harsh on it given the circumstances. It pains me to say that this was a loser, but it was only a very slight loser. It just felt a bit less intense than it did previously and left me ever so slightly disappointed. The launches still hit, but the inversions and the switchbacks didn't feel quite as intense as I remembered, but they were still solid. With all that being said though, I still love this coaster and it absolutely delivers an amazing ride experience. Steel Vengeance was running great during my 2 rides and was an absolute blast. I came into this trip very eager to get on it and specifically to compare it to Air Force 1. I found that while Vengeance is much longer and doesn't have an over-the-top section like Airie's Quad Down, I still prefer Air Force 1 ever so slightly considering that in my opinion it has many more memorable moments like the stall, double up, and arcade roll. Steel Vengeance is still a dream of a ride though, and it remains unmoved in my overall rankings pretty much. I can't deny that it is pretty close if not a perfect coaster, but for me I tend to enjoy experiences that feel a bit more unique. All of Cedar Point's B&Ms, including Raptor, Gatekeeper, Rougarou, and Valraven, are all very fun coasters and give great rides in their own respect. My opinion on all 4 of them remain largely unchanged after rewriting them. Raptor is still a whippy invert, Gatekeeper is still graceful, Rougarou is still intense, and Balraven still has that great first drop. The order in which I ranked them didn't change at all, and they at most moved 1 or 2 spots each in my overall rankings. I suppose this could also be considered a winner since it did rise in my overall rankings, but I just put it here because it pretty much just remained my number 1 coaster at Kings Island. I managed to get a sunset ride on it this time though, which was just so good. And the layout is relentless, and I like the out and back setting of this one compared to the twister layouts of most GCIs. I wholeheartedly believe that this is a very underrated coaster and it runs very well. Yes! Yes! So I got 4 new credits on this trip, 3 of which are new coasters to their respective parks since my last visits. Snoopy's Soapbox Racers is very similar to Good Gravy at Holiday World, but I found it to be just a little bit better. Wild Mouse is the newest ground-up coaster at Cedar Point, and it didn't spin as much as I expected it to, but it was pretty solid overall for what it was, but it wasn't anything too special. Now, the big ticket item we have to discuss. I got 2 rides on Top Thrill 2, and holy crap, this coaster is absolutely insane. Samperla did a great job creating this ride experience if you can look past the obvious closure of last year. The backwards launch in particular and going up that back spike is easily my favorite part of the ride. You just go so high up and it feels like you're floating there for a minute with a great view. I can't stress enough how much I hope every enthusiast can get to Cedar Point to experience this eventually. The only minor nitpick I have is that it does have a slight rattle on the launch track, but it's nothing that's too big of a deal. Overall, the coaster is an absolute 11 out of 10 and I can't wait till I get to ride it again. Overall, I thought the park operations were pretty good throughout my trip. I was especially impressed with Cedar Point's ride operations, specifically in terms of dispatches. Most, if not all, the coasters were running 3 train ops and were dispatching pretty fast. That is something I would just expect at Kings Island, but I was positively surprised by at Cedar Point. I was particularly impressed with Top Thrill 2, especially considering the issues from last year. During my visit, the ride experienced very minimal downtime and the trains were being dispatched very efficiently. I did encounter a couple of issues with breakdowns at Cedar Point, causing me to have to wait an extra 40 minutes in line for Millennium Force. Now normally I would have just gotten back out of line and come back later, but we had already waited an hour at that point and had literally gotten to the front and gotten onto the train before they made us get off because of a mechanical issue. I would have hoped that they would have Millie running better this early in the season, especially during its 25th anniversary and considering it just got a new lift motor, although maybe that's what was causing issues. Breakdowns also prevented me from getting a ride on Gemini this time around and made it a bit difficult for me to get on Maverick. Aside from that though, most of the rides did not experience downtime, at least while I was waiting for them, and the staff did a great job keeping the lines moving very quickly, especially considering how long most of the lines were. Overall though, I had a great visit to these 2 world-class parks over the weekend. The operations were great and the coaster lineups were better than ever. I urge anyone who hasn't been to plan a trip to experience everything Cedar Point and Kings Island have to offer. Make sure to leave a comment and tell me about your experience with the rides and the operations at these parks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.